and welcome everyone. The topic we're going to cover today is very important. As we all know, growing company revenues is a key thing right now, and starting new businesses in established companies is especially challenging. So we're going to cover three things. The first is I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about the key aspects of starting something entrepreneurial. And then Ricardo will do a deep dive on the leadership and entrepreneurial issues involved in starting new businesses. And then at the end, we'll try and bring it together with the aspects of established companies and the entrepreneurial issues. So of course, there's a caveat, and that's why we're here, which is that the real challenge is getting things to work well in established companies where you have these entrepreneurial ideas. So there are significant advantages to working in an established company, but the challenge, and again, this is why we're here today, is how to combine the aspects of each of those. So let me start with the aspects of just a few things about entrepreneurship and starting with new ideas. So we very much believe that it makes sense to actually think about what you're going to do before you just leap in. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about putting a business plan together in a room with the door locked. Very much you have to go out and talk to people and interact. But the reason to spend the time doing that before you invest a lot of effort and resources is basically convince yourself that this is worth doing, and also figure out what it is you're actually going to need to develop your product or service. And you're going to have to get money from somewhere. So in an established company, that may be in front of a committee, it may be through a budgeting process, or it may be through some outside investors. But you need to be able to explain to them why they should give you money. And then also you're going to need other people to help you out, and so you need to explain to them why they might join you. So basically, if you're going to start a new business, you need two things: a good idea and a business model to go along with it. So in terms of the idea, you typically have a product or service. You need to figure out who the customers are, and this is a key aspect of actually getting out of your office and doing things, is figuring out that what you think is the need for your product or service, that the customers really agree with you, and it's really something they're willing to pay for. And then you need to figure out whether or not there's more than just one person who might actually do that. And ultimately, if you're going to be successful from a business perspective, you need to have a business model, and it's just a fancy word for figuring out how you're going to make money doing what you're doing. And in terms of innovating, it really can be innovation in all or just some of these. So there's many companies that have innovated in terms of the business model and have revolutionized or disrupted a market that way. So in terms of remembering that it's the entrepreneur, one of the things that's different from an entrepreneurial point of view is you really have to take responsibility for all these things to really make things happen. So your job responsibilities are very broad in that sense. So just a minute on engineering and science-based businesses. Both Ricardo and I have worked in industries that have a strong engineering and science basis. And one of the challenges here is that it tends to take a long time and a lot of money to actually show that something will work. And I know that most of you are familiar with this based on the companies that you work at and the things you've done. So the need may be obvious, but especially if you're starting with a technical solution, it's important to go and confirm with customers that the need is really there. Prototyping, you typically can't just do things with Post-it notes, that you actually have to use some fairly expensive equipment and staff to actually do your prototyping. Similarly, you typically can't just jump to commercial production, that you need to do one or more pilot scales along the way. Oftentimes there are regulators who want to see that you can actually make things on a commercial scale on a regular, consistent basis. Intellectual property is often important in these types of companies. And then also you need a wide range of technical disciplines to actually make things work. And finally, even if you work in a company where you have the resources to go right from the raw materials to the commercial product, oftentimes you still need partnerships to actually change a market or access a market, or you may need a special supplier to provide part of what you need for your product or service. So a question Ricardo and I get asked a lot is entrepreneurship in established companies possible? And our answer is a resounding yes. And as good engineers and scientists, we have data to support this. The Technology Review, which is the magazine published by MIT, they have a list of 50 disruptive companies they put together each year, and the list for 2013 just came out recently. And over a third of them were established companies, so companies that are around 20 years or more since they were founded. And in fact, something that really surprised me, over 10 of the companies were over 100 years old, and you can see those 10 listed here. So the notion that just because you're an established company, you can't be innovative, you can't come up with new things, truly is not true. So I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo now, and he's going to do our deep dive on leadership and entrepreneurship issues.
Thank you, Howie. I'm glad to have a chance to talk to you. I'd like to take the next step here and go into some of the issues of leadership and entrepreneurship, which I'm sure you're interested in and which are relevant to our important topic right now. One thing to emphasize, that no matter whether you are a small company or a large company, no matter whether you're a startup or an established company, a good leader is a good leader. The thing that differentiates a leader from an entrepreneur or makes a leader an entrepreneur are two things. The nature of the involvement, which is deeply personal, and the intensity of the commitment, which is total. And these are two themes that I'll be talking about in the next few slides, and you'll see how they shape the differentiation between a leader and an entrepreneurial leader. And to do that, I'm going to touch on three key issues. First, the difference between leadership and management. Second, the nature of the entrepreneurial commitment itself. And third, the role of the entrepreneur in the face of uncertainty. Let me start with the first one, difference between leadership and management. And what I'm doing here is just going to be to summarize a very good article, which I recommend. By the way, I believe you're going to get a PDF file of all these slides after the presentation, and so you can see some of these references. And what I have done is I have captured the difference between leadership and management. I shouldn't say the difference, the characteristics of leader and manager in four key areas, and I'm going to run through them fairly quickly, but you'll see how, at least to me, they were very enlightening in understanding the two elements. So first of all, when a leader points, a manager plans. When a leader aligns, a manager organizes. When a leader inspires, a manager problem solves. When a leader produces change, a manager produces predictability. So just look at these four pairs for a minute. A leader points, a manager plans, a leader aligns, a manager organizes, a leader inspires, a manager problem solves, a leader produces change, a manager produces predictability. And this doesn't mean really that they're necessarily different people. It's the leader in you who does the left. It's the manager in you who does the right. Again, I refer you to the article by Cotter. I'm going to run very quickly through these just to give you a little flavor of what we're talking about, but I recommend you go into the article, which goes into it in much more detail. So dealing first with leader points, a manager plans. A leader basically defines a vision and a direction, while the manager is tasked with establishing budgets and the activities that are needed. With respect to aligning and organizing, the leader articulates and engages in the conversation, while the manager identifies the needed skills and staff. With respect to inspiring and problem solving, the leader motivates, creates a culture, whereas the manager foresees and addresses hurdles. And finally, in the produce change versus produce predictability, the leader is really tasked with expanding the horizons, with developing ambitious goals, whereas the manager assures that these goals can be reached. Now, these are very different strengths. They are very different inclinations. The key question is, how can we do both? Now, this becomes a particularly important question in a situation where you are leading and managing unlimited resources, which, as you know, is really a key characteristic of a small entrepreneurial startup, but we are proposing is also what you, if you want to be an entrepreneurial leader in an established corporation, need to face. So let me run through a few of the elements of this. First of all, as is obvious, in an entrepreneurial mode, you wear both hats. What is important is that you understand your own propensity to management or to leadership and to act accordingly. You have to sense when it is time to lead and when it is time to manage. And you have to behave accordingly at the right time. This is perhaps one of the biggest challenges, especially for an entrepreneur that starts a company, is to judge when you need to let others manage while you lead and when you have to step in and act. Now, none of us is perfect, and so if, in fact, we need management bolstering, there are very good training programs. And I'm sure many of your companies have them, things like time management, organizational skills. If your challenge is on the leadership side, if you need to sharpen your leadership skills, the recommendation that Howie and I have, and I'm sure this is no surprise to you, get a good coach and mentor. Now, you may find one within your own organization. It is often useful to find mentors and coaches in other organizations. And the last thing I want to just bring up, which is something that has haunted me over my 30 years of presumably success, but it took me, I still haven't learned. When hiring, to appreciate a good manager, obviously, but do not confuse it with good leaders. And I have made a number of mistakes where I saw fantastic resumes and didn't really appreciate fully that those described good managers but didn't necessarily lead to good leaders. Again, I recommend that you go through the article. It's very worthwhile. Let me turn to a second item, the nature of the entrepreneurial commitment. Howie showed you a slide earlier where he mentioned that the key characteristic of the entrepreneur is the degree of the involvement of the individual and the intensity of the commitment. The key is that for the entrepreneur, it's all about a total emotional engagement with an idea, a concept, or an innovation. And I emphasize innovation because in a more established companies, that is where the entrepreneurial intensity will really count. Once this emotional engagement catches, okay, the entrepreneur is on a mission which in fact becomes all-consuming. And as a matter of fact, nothing will get in the way of the pursuit of the mission. In effect, what we're talking about is that the emotional engagement, which we talked about at the top of this slide, is total. Now, such an emotional engagement has positives and has challenges. Let me talk first about the positive. First of all, and this is obvious, your passion feeds your energy. You often talk about how the passionate entrepreneur, and within a larger organization, I used to be in one too, the passion for the idea or for the innovation creates an enormous amount of energy. That really is expressed in an enthusiasm that is contagious, which then enables you to attract the best. Another very important characteristic of this total emotional engagement of an entrepreneur is that obstacles become challenges, not roadblocks. Okay? They become opportunities for testing the limits and for finding how to overcome them. In fact, I like to characterize the whole thing in one phrase which applies whether you are in a small organization or a large one. For the entrepreneurial leader, there is no problem related to your mission that is not your problem. From the dirt in the hallway to the issues of how to get a multi-million-dollar contract signed. No problem related to this mission is not your problem. Okay, on the negative side, at least that's have been my experience, okay? The emotional engagement is so overriding that I have felt, and other entrepreneurs have, to be involved in everything, okay? And coming with that is a sense often of impatience. I can do it faster myself. Now, sometimes this comes with a sense of I can do it better myself, and you'll see that's very dangerous because what that results in is that, in fact, we do not leverage our team, okay? And it's not done because of not recognizing the power of the team members, but almost blindly we just charge ahead, and sometimes we do not draw on our team's skills. And of course, it's something that I alert you to in a larger corporation, that if in fact you are so engaged in your mission, sometimes you lose sight that in a larger operation there is a organizational structure, and there has to be a certain recognition of the value and importance and respect of the people who you report to. And overall, you know, what you're doing is you have a sense of possessiveness, which then translates into a strong need for control. Now, there are consequences of control. I won't go into these in great detail, but there are some of the things that Howie and I talk about in our course at Stanford in the fall. First of all, it limits your horizon. And we talk about it in our course in terms of constraining or limiting your ability to expand your frame of reference. The control kind of shrinks you. It also then ends up blocking the leader's ability to see options, which, especially in a smaller company, limits the leader's preparedness to deal with the unexpected. And something, again, that I've had a challenge with is that it has pushed me often to act prematurely, which of course is not only bad for leadership, but it is bad for the success of an operation. I'd like to turn to the third issue, the role of a leader in the face of uncertainty, and I'll touch on this just briefly. It's discussed more in several chapters in my little book that Michelle mentioned, Letters to a Young Entrepreneur. And the concept here comes from the fact that each of us have our own risk profile, our own risk affinity, okay? And to me, one of the key roles of the leader is what I express as absorbing uncertainty. The leader absorbs uncertainty in order to release his or her team members to do their best. Now, many of you are involved in highly technical companies where the success is pushing the limits of technology. And you'll relate to the fact that when you have a very talented scientist or engineer working for you, that individual is extremely comfortable pushing the limits of risk in their domain of expertise. I've had many reporting to me. But whereas their risk profile is very aggressive in the area of their expertise when it comes to thinking, how am I going to finance the project, or how am I going to have my company survive, their uncertainty starts coming in, and it tends to block their ability to do what they're best. The way I imagine this is that when I engage, as a leader, engage somebody to join me and join my team, and tell them to become part of our effort and our dream. I take a trust packet from that individual. It's not a written contract. It's really an eye-to-eye understanding. And as I take this trust packet and put it in my backpack, I establish a covenant with that individual. It's really basically a promise that if you do your best, trust me, I will do my absolute best to lead us to the success of our venture. Now, the consequence of this, as you grow in responsibility and the size of your company grows, is the backpack gets quite heavy, okay, and the journey for the leader becomes very lonely. And it's a fascinating and important topic that we do touch on in our class in the fall of how does the leader, the top leader, cope with this loneliness and this feeling of weight of the responsibility. Finally, I'd like to start the topic of what is obviously of interest to you and the topic of this conversation, and that is to touch on some of the items that deal with what are the challenges, opportunities in established companies to become more entrepreneurial, and some suggestions on how to approach them. Okay, I want to talk about two edges, and Howie started off by saying, when he provided the caveat, he said, okay, an entrepreneur in a small startup company has certain advantages. Corporations, more established companies, have advantages too, and the key is how to combine the two. So let me talk a little bit about what we're calling the entrepreneurial edge. First, in an entrepreneurial mindset, the individual needs to feel and feels fully empowered, okay? Which means that accountability, his or her accountability, encompasses the entire scope of the venture, from the innovation to the actual final commercial success, okay? And so, in effect, this is important because under circumstances of tight resources, these tight resources for the entrepreneur tend to concentrate the mind and focus the entrepreneurial effort. And under those circumstances, failure is not an option. It is a possibility. And in fact, the possibility for failure actually tests persistence, tests endurance, tests what I said earlier about looking at stumbling blocks as challenges and opportunities rather than roadblocks, and it tests our ability to push the limits. And finally, in an entrepreneurial, smaller environment, we do have multiple methods for reward that, in the case of a small company, include company ownership. They are not necessarily pivotal to create an entrepreneurial attitude. And I mention this specifically because, of course, in a larger company like the ones that you are part of, that becomes a little more complicated. But it is an issue to think about, and we'll touch on that at the end. So on the flip side, what is the established company's edge? Well, first of all, clearly, your infrastructure, human resource, accounting, legal, things that as a small company, we struggle. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough established presence to attract the right strengths. We struggle with the fact that we don't have the ability to easily tap this infrastructure. Well, an established company has that, and that's very, very useful, and it's a tremendous edge in the innovative process. The second, of course, is resources, both technical expertise, analytical equipment. Just the total scale of a resource of an established company is a very powerful component of success, which comes about also with scale-up muscle and commercial reach, and obviously the influence with policymakers and regulators. The other thing that an established company has the luxury of is to have a long-term mindset. And so this is an ability then to see beyond just tomorrow. Okay, so the key way of grasping this is if we look at some of the challenges that as an established company you have to be more entrepreneurial. And I'm going to split it into corporate challenges and personal challenges. On the corporate side, and Howie mentioned that in his first part where he talked about the need for the entrepreneur to look at all the stages of the life cycle of an innovation or a development. The essential necessity for the entrepreneur to get close to the customer to test the idea viability. That is not always easy in a more established, larger corporation. And of course, the equivalent issue is to gain enough autonomy by the entrepreneurial individual to test an idea and pursue it if it's good, especially because of some of the complexities of larger organizational structures. And of course, part of that is the finesse and skill needed if you are in a larger company to attract cross-functional buy-in and to get the necessary and full resources and support. And of course, also the fact that you are often, in order to embody your innovation, you need to find new business models. And the key question is really, in effect, and this is really key, can a new initiative compete with the bread and butter projects in an established company? Okay, these are some of the corporate challenges. Now let us turn to what I call the more personal challenges that as you think about entrepreneurship in a larger company, you need to be aware of. First of all, by definition, the entrepreneur is starting small. And the question is, can you, as a current or prospective entrepreneur, step into starting small? Second, and connected with starting small, it is a little more difficult to get noted in your organization. I've been in a large organization, and part of the challenge of especially younger people in a larger company is you want to get engaged, you want to get noted. Will you be noted? Can you live with that challenge of being noted? And within the context of starting small and the challenge of being noted, can you take total ownership? Okay, and related to what I said earlier, can you overcome the established corporate operational ballast, okay, which will require for you as the entrepreneur to put everything on the line while within the umbrella of an established company. In fact, the reason I left a large corporation to start a smaller company was because although I felt the security of the larger umbrella over me, it inhibited me to feel that I could put everything on the line. So that's an important question that you need to ask yourself personally, internally, if you are pushing the entrepreneurial boundaries, if you will, within a large company. And then, of course, the question of can you manage uncertainty and the fear of failure, which in a larger corporation has different implications than in a smaller company. So bottom line, looking at all of this, what we're really asking is if you want to be an entrepreneur, in effect, do you feel free within the established corporation to fly? Okay, with that, I'm going to turn the podium back to Howie for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Ricardo. And just in terms of sort of wrapping up the things that we've touched on today, within an established company, it really helps to have top leadership buy-in. So it provides sort of that air cover you need to do the things you're looking to do. Because as Ricardo mentioned, you have to sort of break a lot of the rules to move things along. And then, and part of the reason you need that top leadership support is that you need to get those resources across all those range of functional areas within your company in order to ultimately bring your new product or idea to market. And then, as Ricardo mentioned, just the reward systems could be more complicated within a larger company. And it's ultimately not about career advancement. It's about really being passionate for what you're working on. And the way I think about this is that typically in larger companies, there's a job description that you've been given, and you can sit and look at your job description and say, okay, is this thing that needs to be done within my job description? And if it's not, you don't do it. If you're passionate about getting something to happen, you don't care about the job description. You just figure out what is it I need to do, and you find a way to make it happen. And that can be the challenge in the larger companies, because a lot of people may just be looking at their job descriptions and wondering why you're coming and trying to help them get something done. So then it's important to remember, as Ricardo said, is that the leadership qualities are the same. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a larger company or a smaller startup. Those challenges about leadership versus managing, you need those in either setting. But what also makes you the entrepreneur, it's really the involvement. It's really personal, and it's very the intensity is very high. And just the example of that is as very senior roles in larger companies, as well as in my roles in startups. Oftentimes, I was driving something to the FedEx office that was nearby because it wasn't done by 3 o'clock when the pickup was, and you had to get it to the FedEx office by 5 o'clock to get something sent to somebody to move things along. And I didn't care if I was the president of the company or not. I was willing to take the challenge, take that package to FedEx and get it done.
It's wonderful to have some of these questions. And so one question was asked, if you are a senior executive, how do you foster the entrepreneurial spirit on a corporation? And this is related to the question, another question, how do you deal with management in an organization that stifles your ideas? If the idea is not what your management likes, then it is no good. All of these are questions that relate to the core issue, really. The attitude of the top of the organization is key to establish an entrepreneurial sense. And what needs to happen is the top executives need to feel that they can, it's part of what I said earlier, that the top leader needs to take on ownership or take on uncertainty, but then release his or her people to do their best. They need to also release them to do the entrepreneurial thing. So the key is that if you have a management that is too concerned with their own points of view or their own narrow path, which may have been very successful in the company and maybe the bread and butter, what needs to happen is the company needs to find senior executives who are comfortable allowing entrepreneurial people to jump in and do what they do best. And so in a sense, it's not just finding the entrepreneurial individuals in your organization. It's making sure that the top leadership buys into the entrepreneurial concept and that the people who they are trying to give this entrepreneurial capability feel supported by that top leadership.
Ricardo, I'll address another question. There's a question about many of you are from developing economies or emerging economies, and the question was about needing ethics in those types of environments. But I'll address that a little bit more broadly. One of the things that's very interesting in emerging economies is that what more and more people are realizing is there's incredible opportunity for innovation. Oftentimes, a key issue is the price of a product or a service, and it used to be that traditionally larger companies would just bring a product from an established economy and lower the price or be an older model. But more and more what people are finding is if you actually go and investigate the need and talk to your potential customers in an emerging economy, you can actually develop a product at a very good price point, very innovative, and now more and more those products are actually then being taken to established economies as new innovative products as well. And specifically about ethics, the bottom line, ethics is really a personal issue, and there are many examples where people have essentially just said no, and even though there may not be the strong ethics culture within the country that they're working in, is that they can set their own standards. And also there are cases where people have brought advisors into their company from places like the World Bank, for example, so from external to the country to help create a new culture of higher ethical standards.
Good. I'm catching. I mean, I'm trying to, as you can see, I'm trying to read some of the many questions, and some are interesting. Here's one that I'll answer very quickly. It asks, should employees in a relatively small startup expect transparency in the upper management? The answer is whether you are a small company or a large company. That's part of the whole concept. If there is no transparency, there is no trust. If there is no trust, you're not going to become entrepreneurial, period. And the only reason I would say the few times that Howie and I have succeeded in our entrepreneurial endeavors is because the team people believed us. And the only way to believe us is if they believe we are genuine. This is a human one-to-one type thing, okay? It has nothing to do with turf or anything else. If they don't believe you, you failed from the beginning. In order to believe you, you have to be open. And so that triggers a lot of thoughts. But there is another...
I'll just add to that. One of the startups I worked at earlier in my career, the CEO, for those of you who are old enough to remember Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton was the master of half-truths, right? I did not, the classic, I did not inhale, right? Yeah. And the CEO in this company was very much like that. He wouldn't lie to you, but he wouldn't tell you the complete truth, and it just ultimately became very frustrating. So the openness is very important. Let me just touch on this one quickly, Ricardo, while you're
have another one.
Others. So there's a question about how do you feel about startups whose employees are distributed geographically around the country, and especially with modern communications like we're using today. It's much easier to do. The company that Michelle mentioned, where I was interim president and CEO, Pearl Therapeutics, that we recently sold, we actually had employees in Silicon Valley, we had employees in New Jersey, we had employees in North Carolina, and there were only about 50 people in the company. We basically had people scattered around because that's where the expertise was that we needed, and people didn't want to move, but we knew we needed their expertise. And so you just have to err on the side of more communication rather than less. So we had twice weekly senior leadership teleconferences. We made a point of once a quarter making sure the senior staff all got together. So you have to work hard at managing, but you definitely can do it.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, in the case when we finally succeeded, we had a couple thousand people, and we had operations in many parts of this country. And the bottom line, as Howie says, is multiple communication, but also physical presence. I mean, you just got to be there. That's the burden of and the excitement of leading a larger company. I see a question here that is very interesting. It says sometimes entrepreneurship within a large company is needed in times of distress and difficulties for the company, when it is also more difficult to persuade the management to take the risk of an innovative idea. That's food for thought. That's food for thought. And unfortunately, what I would say is it depends on who is leading the charge. And hopefully, the top executive of the company will recognize that innovation is the path to getting out of a difficult situation. If the top of the company does not recognize that, then I would say I predict it's not going to work because, again, part of the whole concept of being entrepreneurial in an established company is the comfort of the entrepreneur that the top of the company believes in me. If that comfort isn't there, then you are draining that very energy that you're trying to tap in the innovative process.
A question I'll address, it's a specific question about starting a company in Nigeria and what types of methodologies to use, such as Lean Startup, Six Sigma, et cetera. It's specifically about Nigeria, but it's really a question that's general. And this comes back to the point about not sitting in an office with the door locked, putting together a 100-page business plan. And really the key thing in all these approaches is getting out and talking to people and, as much as possible, prototyping and testing your idea with real customers as early as possible. You can also, something we encourage in the entrepreneurship classes I teach here at Stanford, is to also, you can learn a lot from industry experts as well, especially early on, to sort of get a lay of the land. But nothing ultimately substitutes for getting out and talking to customers and trying something with them and seeing how they respond to it.
One last question, Michelle. Here's a question, interesting. In the case of acquisitions, how does the company being acquired maintain their entrepreneurial culture? In your experience with them, as a smaller company's culture, has the smaller company's culture of innovation survived? Very good question. And I have had experience both being on the buying side and being on the bought side, so to speak. And I would say, again, it's a function of how, there are two complications here. When you are acquired, you have to become part of one company. You cannot have separate companies. So you cannot continue to have your identity of your innovation within a larger company. That just creates major problems. On the other hand, you do want to give the acquired company the sense that they have an important role to play. And I would say, and Howie, you may have more experience on that it is important that the entrepreneurial leadership of the smaller company, if they can transition into becoming important leadership of the larger company, then you have an optimum, because without continuing to separate the two. So you have to have merger, but if the entrepreneurial leader is really accepted within the larger company as part of the future of the combined companies, then there's a good chance actually the larger company will harness the benefits of the innovative effort.
One or two specific examples on that is in the life sciences area, probably the best example was when Hoffman LaRoche bought Genentech, and at this point now, Hoffman LaRoche has actually shut down most of their research in their traditional location of New Jersey, and really rely on Genentech for their core research. And a lot of the senior managers, not all of them, but a lot of the senior managers at Genentech ultimately took on broader roles within Hoffman LaRoche. So for me, it ultimately comes back to the issue of leadership, and especially in the acquiring company, is there the leadership to really figure out how to leverage that entrepreneurial spirit and try and maintain it and really infect the rest of the company with it.
Good. Okay. Thank you.